On Saturday, April 12th, just after 8 in the evening, the ballroom lights at the Charleston Harbor Resort were reflecting off crystal glasses and polished marble floors. My ex-husband was standing at the center of it all, tuxedo-pressed hair perfectly in place, one hand wrapped around a champagne flute, and then his smile froze. I wasn't in that room. I was 3 states away in Savannah, Georgia, sitting at my kitchen table with the windows open to the humid spring air. But I knew the exact moment it happened. I knew because the call came less than an hour later, and the first thing Leonard Bishop said to me was, "Ava, I believe your amendment just made its debut. My name is Ava Callahan. I'm 32 years old. 6 months ago, I finalized my divorce from Ethan Mercer, a corporate real estate broker who measures success in square footage and applause. Tonight, he married the woman he left me for Madison Clark, his former marketing director under chandeliers large enough to blind a small country. People assume that revenge stories start with shouting, with slammed doors, with someone plotting in the dark. Mine started with a toast. According to Leonard, retired estate attorney, longtime friend of my late aunt, and an invited guest because of certain shared business circles, the reception was everything Ethan ever wanted. Investors at every table. A string quartet near the windows. Waiters balancing silver trays like choreography. Ethan gave a speech about building everything from the ground up. He spoke about fresh starts and bold decisions. He even made a passing remark about leaving the past behind with clarity. Then Leonard stood up to congratulate him. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse anyone of anything. He simply referenced the coastal marina project Ethan had been pitching to half the room and mentioned almost casually that the controlling interest in that property was still jointly recorded publicly under an amendment filed during Ethan's first marriage, under my name. The room went quiet, Leonard told me. Not gasps, not chaos, just the kind of silence that settles when professionals realize there's paperwork they didn't know about. Ethan laughed at first. He thought it was a joke. Then Leonard clarified that the amendment had been recorded months earlier with the county, that zoning updates had increased the property's valuation, and that any representation of sole ownership might require clarification. That was when the smile froze. He couldn't deny it. He had signed the amendment himself. I remember sitting at my kitchen table staring at the legal copy of that document still tucked inside the top drawer near the refrigerator. The paper wasn't dramatic. It didn't glow. It was just a certified record stamped and dated, filed on a Tuesday morning in October. I didn't attend the wedding. I didn't send a message. I didn't plan a scene. But something from our past was spoken out loud in front of his new wife and his investors, and for the first time, Ethan Mercer wasn't in control of the narrative. The truth had been filed long before the champagne was poured, and this story didn't begin in a ballroom. It began with a spreadsheet. The divorce didn't begin with shouting. It began on Monday, September 26th, in a glass office tower in Charlotte, North Carolina, with a stack of quarterly tax documents and a pot of coffee that had gone cold beside my laptop. Back then, I was still Mrs. Ava Mercer. Ethan and I had been married for 8 years. When we first moved to Charlotte, we rented a modest condo near South End. He was building his career in corporate real estate brokerage, working long hours chasing commercial listings. I was already a licensed CPA specializing in small business compliance and audit preparation. We used to joke that between his deals and my spreadsheets, nothing in our house escaped documentation. At the beginning, we were partners in the true sense of the word. I helped structure his early LLC filings. I reviewed contracts before he signed them. When he landed his first major retail development client, we celebrated with takeout barbecue, eaten straight from the containers on our kitchen counter. But success changes some people quietly. By year 5, Ethan's suits were tailored in New York. The condo had been replaced with a 4-bedroom house in Myers Park. His circle shifted from coworkers to investors. Dinners became networking events. Conversations became rehearsals. Madison Clark entered the picture around that time. She was hired as marketing director for his firm, sharp-polished, always 2 steps ahead in a room. She and I met at a holiday fundraiser. She complimented my navy dress and asked about my accounting practice with professional interest. There was nothing inappropriate then, nothing obvious. What changed wasn't explosive, it was subtle. Ethan stopped asking for my opinion on deals. He began saying my team handled it instead of we looked at it. He insisted certain documents were too internal for me to review. Even though I had prepared every financial disclosure since our first year of marriage, I noticed something else too. His language shifted. He talked about visibility, about positioning, about how investors valued confidence over caution. If I raised concerns about debt ratios or tax exposure, he would smile and tell me I worried too much. "You see risk," he once said, standing in our kitchen with a glass of bourbon in his hand. "I see opportunity." Maybe he did, but opportunity in my profession still had to reconcile on paper. That Monday in September, I was preparing our joint tax projections for the fourth quarter. Ethan had launched a holding entity tied to a coastal marina property outside Charleston, a project he described as a long-term play. He told me it was clean, straightforward. As I entered the numbers into my ledger, something felt off. A transfer from one of his business accounts had been categorized as consulting expense. Yet it corresponded with an escrow deposit on the marina property. My name appeared on the original acquisition paperwork from years earlier, used for credit strength during financing. I assumed it was an oversight, a classification error. I printed the transaction summary and placed it in a folder labeled Review. That folder sat on the corner of my desk for 3 days while I waited for Ethan to come home early enough for a calm conversation. He never did. Instead, he returned each night, distracted phone buzzing conversations about expansion and branding filling the air between us. When I mentioned the discrepancy lightly, he waved it away. "It's temporary," he said. "The structure's evolving. Structures can evolve. Records cannot." I didn't accuse him. I didn't suspect anything dramatic. I told myself marriages have phases. That ambition can look like secrecy when you're tired. But I began keeping copies of everything. The ledger on my desk grew thicker. And somewhere between the bourbon glasses and the business dinners, I started to realize I was no longer part of the team. I was just the person reconciling the numbers. What I didn't yet understand was how important one signature on those numbers would become. It was Thursday, October 6th, and the air in Charlotte had that early fall crispness that makes everything feel sharper than it is. I left work later than usual that evening, the review folder tucked neatly inside my leather tote. The city lights reflected off the glass towers downtown, and for a moment I told myself I was overthinking it. Transfers get miscategorized, entities restructure, ambitious men move money around in ways that look messy before they look brilliant. Still, numbers don't lie. They just wait. When I got home, Ethan was already there. His jacket was thrown over a dining chair, his phone buzzing every few minutes on the kitchen island. He looked up briefly when I walked in. "You're late," he said, not unkindly, just distracted. "So, are you?" I replied, setting my bag down. Dinner was takeout in white cardboard containers. We ate standing at the counter. I waited for the right moment, then slid the printed transaction summary across the granite. "I noticed this escrow deposit," I said evenly. "It's categorized as consulting, but it ties to the marina property outside Charleston." He glanced at the paper for less than 3 seconds. "It's fine," he said. "Temporary accounting." The holding structure shifted. "I'd like to understand the shift," I answered. "My name appears on the original acquisition documents. That exposure matters." He exhaled through his nose a familiar sound. Not anger, annoyance. "You're reading too much into it," he said. "We used your credit profile during the initial purchase. It made the financing smoother. That's all. That wasn't all." On Saturday morning, October 8th, while Ethan was at a networking breakfast, I logged into the county property records database from my office computer. Public filings don't require permission. They require patience. The marina parcel was there listed under a holding LLC. Ethan had formed 2 years earlier. But when I opened the original deed transfer attached to the file, my name appeared alongside his as guarantor during the financing phase. A scanned signature sat at the bottom of the document. Mine. I remembered signing it. We had been told it was procedural, protective, a formality to secure better rates. What I hadn't remembered was that my guarantor status created leverage and risk. I scrolled further and found a draft amendment prepared but not yet recorded, adjusting ownership percentages within the entity. The draft carried Ethan's digital signature, dated the previous month. It indicated a reallocation of interest that would reduce my formal percentage once executed. He hadn't mentioned it. The draft wasn't final. It wasn't filed. But it existed. That was the first moment something inside me shifted, not dramatically, not explosively, but with the quiet realization that I was being managed, not partnered. That evening, I asked him about the amendment. "It's housekeeping," he said. "We're restructuring before new investors come in. It's cleaner for whom I asked." He set his glass down harder than necessary. "For the company," he said. "You're not involved in day-to-day operations anymore. It makes sense to streamline." I wasn't involved because he had edged me out. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse him of betrayal or manipulation. Instead, I printed copies of the draft and the recorded deed. I placed them in a new folder, thicker cardstock this time, and labeled it simply Marina. Over the next few weeks, divorce entered our conversations not as an emotional eruption, but as a logistical inevitability. The distance between us felt corporate, negotiated. When he proposed a fast settlement to avoid unnecessary friction, I agreed to review the terms. He wanted efficiency, so did I. What he didn't know was that I had begun to understand the weight of one signature and how permanent ink becomes once it touches a county record. At that point, I still hoped it was miscommunication. I still hoped there was a version of this where we untangled finances and walked away respectfully, but hope, like credit, has limits. And the Marina file on my desk was no longer just paperwork. It was evidence that something fundamental had shifted in our marriage long before either of us said the word divorce. On Tuesday, October 18th, I drove to the Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds during my lunch hour. The sky was overcast, the kind of flat gray that makes buildings look heavier than they are. I had taken a personal day from the firm under the pretense of administrative catch-up. In my passenger seat sat the Marina folder, thicker now, edges slightly worn from being opened too often. I wasn't there to start a war. I was there to correct a record. 2 days earlier, Ethan had handed me a draft of our divorce settlement across the kitchen counter. His tone was efficient, almost rehearsed. "This doesn't have to be messy," he said. "We can keep it clean, quick." The proposal divided liquid assets in tidy columns: retirement accounts, the house, vehicles. The Marina holding entity was listed under business interests, sole operator. My name did not appear. When I pointed that out, he didn't hesitate. "You're not involved operationally," he said. "It simplifies disclosures if ownership aligns with management." Simplifies for whom, I had thought. But I didn't argue. I took the draft and told him I would review it. Now I stood in a government building with fluorescent lights humming overhead, holding a revised amendment prepared the night before at my dining room table. I hadn't slept much. Not because I was angry, because I was thinking. The original deed had included me as guarantor. The draft amendment Ethan created shifted percentages internally within the LLC, but it had never been formally recorded. Legally, what isn't recorded doesn't fully exist in public record. What is recorded does. I approached the counter and handed the clerk the notarized amendment I had prepared, clarifying co-ownership percentages consistent with the original acquisition structure. It didn't inflate my interest. It didn't fabricate anything. It simply aligned the filing with the reality of the financing documents both of us had signed. The clerk stamped it with mechanical indifference. There is something sobering about the sound of an official seal pressing into paper. It doesn't ask questions, it doesn't care about feelings, it only confirms. When I walked back to my car, the folder felt lighter. That evening, Ethan came home later than usual. His phone rang twice during dinner. I could feel the distance between us like a third presence at the table. "I'm meeting investors in Charleston next month," he said casually. "Marina's moving faster than expected." "That's good," I replied. He studied me for a second, as if waiting for resistance. There wasn't any. Over the next week, we finalized mediation dates. The divorce would be uncontested, expedited, no drawn-out hearings, no dramatic accusations, just signatures. When he slid the final property allocation summary toward me on Monday, October 24th, I noticed he hadn't double-checked the public filings. He trusted the internal draft he had created months earlier. He signed, I signed, and the paperwork moved forward. I didn't confront him about the amendment being recorded. I didn't threaten exposure. I didn't mention the zoning review notices that had quietly been mailed to our Charlotte address regarding coastal development updates. I simply stopped shielding him from his own assumptions. At night, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the certified recording receipt from the county office. It was a plain document, white paper, black ink, time-stamped and archived. There was no drama in it, but there was permanence. I wasn't trying to take anything from him. I wasn't trying to punish him. I was reclaiming clarity. And clarity once filed has a way of resurfacing when people least expect it. The pressure in our house didn't explode, it tightened, like air before a storm that hasn't yet decided where to break. By Friday, December 2nd, the house in Myers Park no longer felt like mine. The divorce had been finalized the previous month quietly, efficiently, as Ethan preferred. No courtroom theatrics, no public unraveling, just signatures, certified copies, and the slow division of a life into labeled boxes. I moved to Savannah the week before Thanksgiving. The townhouse my aunt left me sat on a shaded street lined with live oaks draped in Spanish moss. It needed paint. It needed plumbing updates. It needed someone who wasn't afraid of starting over. That someone apparently was me. The first morning I woke up there Monday after the holiday, I brewed coffee in a chipped ceramic mug that had survived 3 addresses and 1 marriage. The air was cool, the kind of southern December that carries a hint of salt from the river. For the first time in months, I felt something close to silence inside my chest. I opened my laptop at the small dining table and began drafting a website for my own accounting consultancy. No firm name attached, no partnership shield, just Ava Callahan, CPA, small business compliance, forensic review, financial clarity, clarity. The word had started to follow me. The Marina folder traveled with me to Savannah. It now sat in the top drawer of my new desk beside the certified county recording receipt from October 18th. I hadn't touched it in weeks. I didn't need to. The record existed whether I looked at it or not. Business trickled in faster than I expected. A bakery owner on Broughton Street needed help untangling payroll tax discrepancies. A landscaping company wanted audit preparation before seeking expansion funding. Word spreads quickly in smaller cities when you return phone calls and explain things without ego. It was during one of those early December afternoons while reviewing receipts for a client that I received an email from Leonard Bishop. We had met formally only once before at my aunt's estate settlement. Leonard had been her attorney for over 20 years, steady, observant, the kind of man who read every page before signing. He had remained in touch after her passing, occasionally forwarding updates about trust distributions or local property assessments. The subject line read, "Charleston Marina, Zoning Update." I opened it. The county outside Charleston had approved preliminary zoning revisions that increased the marina parcel's potential development density. In simple terms, the land was worth significantly more than it had been when Ethan first pitched it as a long play. Leonard's email was measured almost academic. Given the recorded amendment clarifying co-ownership percentages, any public representation of sole controlling interest could invite scrutiny. "You may wish to be aware," he wrote. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Ethan had told investors the project was accelerating. He had implied ownership alignment with management. He had built an engagement party narrative around growth and momentum, and yet the public record unchanged, stamped archive said something slightly different. That evening, as I painted the front door of the townhouse a deep slate blue, I felt the weight of a choice settling into place. I could call him. I could warn him that the zoning increase would draw attention, that investors tend to verify controlling interests when valuations rise, that the amendment bearing both our signatures was easily searchable, or I could remain silent. The paintbrush moved steadily across the wood. For years, I had corrected his oversights before they became consequences. I had softened disclosures, double-checked filings, flagged exposures quietly. I had been the invisible compliance department of his ambition. Standing there on a ladder in fading light, I realized something simple and final. I was no longer responsible for protecting him from the truth. The next week, Savannah's holiday lights went up along River Street. My client list grew. The townhouse began to feel warmer, less like an inheritance and more like a decision. Meanwhile, invitations were being printed somewhere in Charleston, thick cardstock, gold lettering. I didn't receive one, but I didn't need to, because the record was already written, and this time I wasn't going to edit it for him. On Wednesday, January 11th, the mail arrived just before noon. Savannah winters are mild, but that morning carried a damp chill off the river. I had just finished a consultation with a local contractor disputing a supplier invoice when I heard the soft metallic click of the mailbox closing downstairs. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. Among the usual envelopes, utility bill, a holiday card that had wandered through forwarding addresses, there was one thicker piece of cardstock cream-colored with gold trim. My name was handwritten in ink that tried very hard to look effortless. Ava Callahan. No, and guessed. The return address read, Charleston, South Carolina. For a moment, I simply stood in the hallway holding it. Ethan hadn't invited me to the engagement party. I hadn't expected a wedding invitation. But this wasn't an invitation. It was an announcement. Inside was a formal card. Ethan Mercer and Madison Clark request the pleasure of your presence at their wedding reception. Black tie. Charleston Harbor Resort. Saturday evening, April 12th. My breath didn't hitch. My hands didn't shake. What surprised me was the small printed insert tucked behind the main card. Ethan Mercer, managing partner, Mercer Coastal Holdings. I read that line twice. Mercer Coastal Holdings was the entity tied to the marina parcel. The same parcel whose amendment sat filed and recorded in Charleston County listing clarified co-ownership percentages that did not align with managing partner as sole controlling interest. He wasn't just celebrating a marriage, he was branding a narrative. That afternoon I called Leonard Bishop. He answered on the second ring, voice steady as ever. I received something interesting, I said. So did I, he replied. Front row table, no less. We agreed to meet the following Monday, January 16th, the next business day at his office near Forsyth Park. Federal offices had been closed that day for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, but Leonard's practice resumed promptly Tuesday morning. His office smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish. Framed certificates lined the walls, each dated decades earlier. Leonard listened while I laid the invitation and insert on his desk. He's pitching the marina at the reception, Leonard said after a pause. I've heard from a colleague in Charleston. Investors will be there. He's representing sole operational control, I replied. Leonard folded his hands. Operational control is not the same as recorded ownership. No, I said. It isn't. For the first time since filing the amendment, I felt the stakes shift from theoretical to immediate. If Ethan publicly represented himself as sole controlling owner during investor conversations, especially after the zoning revision increased valuation, the discrepancy wouldn't remain a private marital artifact. It would become a matter of due diligence. Leonard studied me carefully. You could call him, he said evenly. Clarify. I thought about that. I thought about the years I had softened disclosures and quietly corrected misclassifications. I thought about the night I painted my townhouse door and decided I was done editing reality for him. I won't interfere, I said finally. But I won't misrepresent either. Leonard nodded once. Understood. When I left his office, the January air felt sharper than before. That evening, Ethan called. His number appeared on my phone for the first time in weeks. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. "Did you get the announcement?" he asked without preamble. I did. "It's going to be a big event," he said. There was something in his voice, confidence layered over tension. "A lot of important people." "I'm sure there are," I replied. He hesitated. "I assume you won't complicate things." The word lingered between us. "I don't complicate public records," I said calmly. Silence. "I'm managing the project," he said sharply. "Everything is structured correctly." "Then you have nothing to worry about," I answered. He exhaled, annoyed. "You're reading into this again," he said, echoing the past. "Good night, Ethan." I ended the call before the tone of his voice could shift further. He wasn't attacking. Not yet. He was defending a version of events that depended on no one asking precise questions. I placed the invitation back in its envelope and slid it into the same drawer as the certified amendment. The two pieces of cardstock rested side by side, one embossed in gold, one stamped in black ink. Only one of them was permanent. On Saturday, April 12th, at exactly 8:47 p.m., Leonard Bishop stood from Table 4 at the Charleston Harbor Resort and adjusted his cufflinks before lifting his glass. I know the time because he told me later. Leonard is precise that way. The ballroom was arranged to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the harbor chandeliers, casting warm light over investors in tailored suits and women in silk gowns. At the center, Ethan and Madison stood beneath a floral arch that probably cost more than my first car. Ethan had already delivered his speech by then. Leonard described it as confident, polished, heavy on phrases like vision ownership and building something lasting. He spoke about resilience, about leaving the past behind, about stepping into a future aligned with purpose. Aligned. That word mattered. By the time Leonard rose to speak, the champagne had loosened the room. Laughter floated between tables. Madison's hand rested lightly on Ethan's arm, her engagement ring catching the light. Leonard began simply. He congratulated them. He wished them stability. He praised ambition when it's grounded in structure. Then he pivoted. "I'm especially impressed," he said in his measured courtroom voice, "with how swiftly the marina project has evolved. Zoning revisions have certainly increased its valuation." Several heads turned. A few investors nodded. Leonard continued almost conversationally. "It's fortunate the controlling interest is so clearly documented in the county records. Public filings provide reassurance when valuations rise." The room quieted. Ethan laughed, not loudly, just enough to signal control. "Of course," he said, "everything is structured properly." Leonard tilted his head slightly. "Yes," he replied. The October 18th amendment clarifying co-ownership percentages was quite thorough. Transparency tends to protect everyone involved. Silence, not dramatic silence, professional silence. The kind that settles when people are recalculating. Leonard told me later he could see it happen in stages. First confusion, then recognition, then the subtle shift of attention away from the bride and toward Ethan. Madison's smile faltered. Not completely, just enough to show she was processing information she hadn't been given. Ethan's grip tightened around his glass. "That was internal housekeeping," he said sharply. "It doesn't affect management authority." "Management and ownership are distinct," Leonard answered calmly, "particularly when external capital is present." An investor at the next table leaned forward. "Are there co-signatory interests?" he asked. The question wasn't hostile. It was procedural. Ethan's jaw set. "There are historical signatures," he said. "Nothing material, nothing material." Leonard didn't argue. He didn't accuse. He simply raised his glass again. "To clarity," he said. The word lingered in the air like a dropped coin. Later that night, Leonard called me from his hotel room. He attempted to redirect the conversation, Leonard said, but investors tend to verify when valuations spike. I suspect inquiries will follow. I stood in my Savannah kitchen, the same drawer open beside me. The gold-embossed invitation lay next to the certified amendment. For a brief moment, I felt something unfamiliar fear, not fear of Ethan, fear of escalation. If investors began digging, my name would surface. Public filings don't hide quietly once searched. My involvement as recorded co-owner would become part of due diligence conversations. I hadn't sought attention, I had sought accuracy, but accuracy attracts light. The next morning, Sunday, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. "We need to talk. This is spiraling unnecessarily. No greeting, no signature." I didn't respond. By Monday morning, my email inbox held 3 notifications from unknown senders requesting clarification regarding historical guarantor status on Mercer Coastal Holdings. The inquiries were polite, formal, legal in tone. The record had been opened, and for the first time since I filed that amendment, I understood something clearly. Truth doesn't just defend, it destabilizes. The storm hadn't broken yet, but the wind had shifted. By Monday, April 14th, the tone had shifted from social embarrassment to institutional inquiry. Savannah woke to clear skies that morning, but my inbox did not feel light. 3 emails had arrived overnight from individuals identifying themselves as compliance officers or legal counsel representing private investment groups. Each message was measured professional and almost identical in structure. "We are conducting standard due diligence regarding Mercer Coastal Holdings. Public filings indicate historical co-ownership percentages. Could you confirm whether any residual guarantor or equity interest remains active? No accusation, no hostility, just verification." I read each message twice before responding to any of them. The instinct to protect, to smooth, to reassure rose briefly in my chest. It was muscle memory, years of editing language on Ethan's behalf. I closed my laptop instead. At 9:30, I called Leonard. "They're reaching out," I said. "They will," he replied. Valuations increased. Capital gets cautious when documentation surfaces. I never intended to be part of his investor narrative. "You're not," Leonard said. "You're part of the public record. There is a difference." By mid-morning, a 4th message arrived, this one forwarded from an unfamiliar assistant at Ethan's firm. It was brief. "Mr. Mercer asserts all controlling interests are properly aligned. Any implication otherwise is misleading." I stared at that line. Misleading. The certified amendment in my drawer was neither implication nor interpretation. It was a recorded fact. Still, I understood the risk. If I responded emotionally or defensively, the situation could escalate into something public and messy. That would benefit no one. At 11, I drafted a single uniform reply to each inquiry. "Thank you for your message." As reflected in the October 18th recorded amendment filed with Charleston County, ownership percentages were clarified prior to the dissolution of my marriage. I no longer participate in operational decisions. Any questions regarding management authority should be directed to Mr. Mercer. No commentary, no accusation, no embellishment. I attached the publicly accessible filing reference number and pressed send. Control does not require volume, it requires precision. By early afternoon, local business news in Charleston had posted a short online piece, "Investors Seek Clarification on Mercer Coastal Structure," following reception remarks. The article was careful, almost understated. It referenced a toast by a retired estate attorney and public filings indicating historical co-signatory interests. It noted that inquiries were ongoing. It did not mention me by name. Yet, around 3, Leonard called again. "Ethan is attempting to characterize the amendment as administrative," he said. "But investors dislike surprises." "I didn't surprise anyone," I replied. "The filing predates the wedding." "Exactly." There was a pause. "Are you prepared for your name to surface?" Leonard asked gently. I looked around my townhouse office. Stacks of client folders, a framed copy of my CPA license, the marina folder resting in the drawer beneath them. "I didn't hide," I said. I documented. That afternoon, Ethan called twice. I didn't answer. At 6, a final email arrived, not from compliance, not from legal counsel, but from Madison Clark. "We need clarity. Did you intend for this to happen?" Her message was shorter than the others. less polished, less controlled. I read it slowly. Intent. That word lingered. I hadn't intended humiliation. I hadn't intended spectacle. I had intended accuracy. And accuracy had moved through the system exactly as it was designed to. I closed the email without replying. Outside, the Savannah sky shifted toward dusk. The air was still. The storm from Saturday night hadn't exploded into chaos. It had moved into conference rooms and inboxes, into review committees and risk assessments. That was where real consequences lived. For the first time since the wedding, I felt something steadier than fear. I felt alignment, not revenge, not victory, just the quiet certainty that the record was doing what records are meant to do, and this time I was not stepping in front of it. By Thursday, April 17th, the consequences were no longer theoretical. At 8:15 a.m., Leonard forwarded me a formal notice issued by the board of Mercer Coastal Holdings. The subject line was Neutral Temporary Review of Executive Authority. The content was not, pending clarification of ownership representations and guarantor disclosures, Mr. Ethan Mercer's executive decision-making powers are suspended subject to internal audit. Suspended. Not accused, not removed. Suspended. The language was careful, but the meaning was unmistakable. Investors had moved from inquiry to action. I read the document twice at my kitchen table, sunlight falling across the wood grain. I felt no rush of triumph, only a tightening in my chest. This was the point of no return. By mid-morning, Charleston Business Radio picked up the story. A commentator referenced unexpected co-ownership filings predating a high-profile remarriage. They spoke about fiduciary duty, about transparency in capital structures. They did not speak about emotion. They spoke about risk. At 11:40 a.m., my phone rang. Ethan. This time I answered. What did you tell them? His voice was sharp-strained, not loud, controlled anger. I told them what's on record, I replied. You could have clarified. I did. I directed them to the filing. You blindsided me. The word landed heavily. The amendment was filed 6 months ago, I said. You signed acknowledgement. Silence. Then quieter. You could have warned me before the wedding. I wasn't invited to advise. His breath hitched, frustration barely contained. You've destabilized everything. No, I said evenly. Documentation did. He exhaled harshly. They're reviewing capital guarantees. If they decide I misrepresented exposure, they can trigger penalty clauses. I already knew that. Leonard had explained it carefully the day before. And if they find no misrepresentation, I asked. Then this still damages confidence, he snapped. Optics matter. Optics, the word lingered between us. I'm not responsible for optics, I said. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. That was almost worse. You've made yourself part of this narrative, he said quietly. If they dig deeper, your name surfaces publicly. Are you prepared for that? There it was, the attempt to shift fear back onto me. I didn't conceal anything, I replied. I won't start now. He hung up without goodbye. At 2 p.m., another development surfaced. Madison Clark's name appeared in a short column on a Charleston financial blog. The piece questioned whether she had knowledge of structural disclosures prior to marriage. The headline was polite but pointed, "New spouse caught in Mercer review." The system does not distinguish cleanly when capital is involved. It examines everyone adjacent. By late afternoon, Leonard confirmed 2 major investors had formally paused additional funding tranches until the audit concluded. Cash flow pressure, board scrutiny, public commentary, the elements of professional unraveling. I sat at my desk as the light outside shifted toward evening. The Marina folder remained closed in the drawer. I had not leaked. I had not exaggerated. I had not spoken publicly. I had answered when asked. That was all. Yet the ripple effect was undeniable. At 6:30 p.m., a final message arrived, this one from Madison again. You didn't have to let it go this far. I stared at the sentence, as if truth had a volume knob, as if disclosure were optional once filed. For the first time since the board notice, something stirred in me, not satisfaction, not relief, but clarity sharpened by gravity. This was no longer about embarrassment at a wedding. This was about professional credibility, and credibility once questioned does not restore quickly. Outside, Savannah's streets grew quiet. Inside Charleston conference rooms, I imagined spreadsheets projected against glass walls, lawyers reviewing clauses, directors measuring exposure. The highest stakes of the story had arrived, not in a ballroom, not in a toast, but in the cold, deliberate machinery of accountability, and it was still moving. On Tuesday, April 22nd at 9 a.m., the final notice was issued. Leonard forwarded it without commentary. The board of Mercer Coastal Holdings had concluded its internal audit. The language was restrained but decisive. Mr. Ethan Mercer is relieved of executive authority effective immediately. A restructuring committee will assume interim oversight pending reallocation of leadership responsibilities. Relieved, not temporarily suspended, not under review. Relieved. The notice cited material lapses in disclosure alignment and failure to adequately communicate ownership structure changes to capital partners. It did not mention weddings. It did not mention me. It did not need to. By noon, the Charleston Business Chronicle had published a longer piece. The article outlined the timeline, the October 18th amendment, the April reception remarks, the investor review, the audit findings. It emphasized governance, fiduciary transparency, institutional confidence. Ethan's name appeared repeatedly. Mine appeared once. Former co-owner. Accurate. Contained. At 1:30 p.m., Leonard called. "It's done," he said. I stood in my Savannah office looking at the framed certificate on my wall, my name etched in quiet lettering. Earned, built, independent. "I never wanted him destroyed," I said. "He wasn't destroyed," Leonard replied. "He was evaluated. That distinction mattered." By late afternoon, a short statement from Ethan appeared online. He cited personal transitions and a desire to pursue new opportunities. The phrasing was familiar, controlled, designed to salvage dignity. I did not feel satisfaction reading it. I felt completion. Around 4 p.m., Madison's final message arrived. I didn't understand the structure. I should have asked more questions. There was no accusation in it, no edge, just admission. I typed a response, then erased it. Typed again, erased again. Finally, I wrote, "Transparency protects everyone." I did not elaborate. When evening settled over Savannah, I walked to the drawer in my desk and removed the Marina folder one last time. I flipped through the certified amendment, the notarized pages, the recorded stamp from Charleston County. I closed it gently. Then I carried it to the filing cabinet in the hallway and placed it inside a labeled archive box. Not hidden, stored. There is a difference. Outside, the air was warm for April. Neighbors watered their lawns. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Ordinary sounds of ordinary stability. The board's decision would ripple for months. Restructuring committees do not move quickly. Reputation repair moves slower. But the decisive moment had passed. The system had functioned. Not because I shouted, not because I exposed, because I documented. For the first time since the invitation arrived in that gold-embossed envelope, I felt something deeper than vindication. I felt alignment. My name was no longer tied to Ethan's ambition. My record was clean. My role was defined by my own work. The toast had frozen his smile. The audit had frozen his authority, and I had not raised my voice once. I stepped onto the small balcony outside my office and watched the sky fade into evening blue. The city hummed gently around me. Justice, I realized, rarely looks dramatic. It looks procedural. It looks like signatures and filings and quiet accountability. It looks like choosing not to protect someone from their own omissions. And healing does not begin with their fall. It begins with your steadiness. If you've ever watched truth unfold slowly instead of explosively share what that felt like for you, your experience might help someone else choose clarity over chaos. And if this story resonated, stay with me for the next one. Sometimes the quietest shifts change everything.